In accord with what I spoke about for the devotional this morning, I want to get into the assumptions that we bring to Scripture. We've seen that this was a big deal for Jesus, right? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Where did we look in Scripture? Mark chapter 4. Okay, Ms. Cosman is listening. No. And so, basically, from the onset, what I want to persuade you today about is that Scripture needs to be read as a story with God at the center of it. And I believe that this will give us a more fuller understanding of who God truly is and His original purposes for humanity. Also, how He intends for us to reflect His image, and subsequently provide motivation for us to live for Him. You see, in the postmodern world that we live today, we have a lot of different ways of looking at reality. You have a lot of thought carrying over from the Enlightenment in the 18th century. You also have a lot of paganism and New Ageism, and many different ways of thinking. And interestingly enough, you can find these very same mindsets within same families, within the same communities that we live in, even within Christianity today. You'd actually be very surprised on how much philosophy is saturated in evangelical theology. And there's even a little bit within Seventh-day Adventism as well. But I want to bring to your attention 4 different ways of reading the Bible that seems common. And one of them is the pre-critical view. The other is historical. The next, theological. And the 4th one is the postmodern way of reading Scripture. And so let's bring our attention to the pre-critical way. This way is more of a devotional way. Devotional way of looking at Scripture. You may meet someone in a home that simply just sits down to pray and uses maybe a little bit of Scripture. And basically, when they read the Bible, this pre-critical way of thinking is that they ask little questions when reading anything in general, and more specifically the New Testament. Questions like, for example, when reading Paul, why is Paul quoting from this psalm or prophet? How does this relate with the overall chapter and book in Bible? Very healthy, critical ways of looking at the Bible. And this view also seems to be somewhat unaware of their own assumptions and biases and tendencies to focus on one aspect of Scripture. We kind of all have our hobby horses when it comes to reading Scripture, would you agree? Some people maybe focus whenever they look through different lenses. So when they open up their Bibles, they're just looking for love. What is love? Or they might be looking at Scripture and trying to find faith. What is faith? Now, these things are not necessarily bad ways of looking at Scripture, but if we're unaware of our assumptions, if we're unaware that we're constantly overemphasizing certain aspects of Scripture, I believe that will actually castrate the significance of it and the overall big picture of the cross. Also, this type of pre-critical reading is concerned first and foremost with knowing right away, what does this mean for me right now? And because of this mindset, you find people going into the genealogies, into the book of Leviticus, or even the Old Testament, and finding themselves really bored. And I want to suggest to you that they're bored because they're trying to find a happy meal. The quick little happy meal in Scripture. As soon as they open it, okay, what does this mean for me right here and right now? But you know, what Scripture is meant for us, meant to impact our lives and increase our relationship with God. But at the same time, we may not always get that quick little snippet or that wisdom nugget. And I think we need to distinguish the Bible from any other type of literature out there, because if we're reading with this pre-critical mindset, what happens is that we make the Bible simply another wisdom book. Maybe kind of like the Book of Confucius or Buddha, or maybe Chicken Soup for the Soul. And now this is not what the Bible is all about. The Bible is about God and his righteousness and how he demonstrates that within history, how he shows it through his law, and very importantly, like David was talking about, how this affects our lives today through the sanctuary. And so this is just one of the different ways of reading Scripture. Another one is the historical reading. The historical reading is more overcritical at times, and it seems like the layperson seems to shun this type of reading. What's the historical context of the book? What was the mindset of the people? And I think David did a great job on kind of giving us a little bit of that perspective. But sometimes people can overdo it. And us theologians, we're actually known for doing that. But nonetheless, there is an aspect of looking at things historically and knowing the ferment of the time and the environment that will enrich our understanding of the Scriptures. And so this is one way of reading it. Usually when lay people react to this type of reading, they say things like, it's not what you know, but it's who you know. Or they may say, the Bible is not complicated. Farmers and shepherds wrote it. And so you might hear this type of rhetoric when the lay person is reacting against the overcritical historian. And then the third reading is the theological reading. This reading simply looks to see how passages fit theologically. So if we're reading Paul, for example, how does Paul relate to the Gospels? Has it dawned on us that actually a lot of what's in the Gospels you cannot find in Paul? Where is Paul getting his Gospel from? And does it build on the Gospels itself? Why is he just using snippets of Old Testament here and there? And why does it seem like it's out of context? I don't want to discourage anyone today from reading Scripture or finding the today relevance of it. But nonetheless, I think these are questions we always need to be bringing to Scripture to keep it fresh and to find a fuller perspective on who God is and what he means for our lives today. And so our fourth and our last different way of reading, it kind of sits between the pre-critical and the overcritical. They more focus on the literary aspect of Scripture, and they kind of venture into philosophy as well. But, one positive contribution of postmodern view is that it brings awareness of, or sociological awareness of man and his biases. But you would know probably from some of Cosmin's classes that postmodernism becomes very relativistic. Can we really know objective truth? And how can we really know the original intent of what the author is saying? You see? And so can we even know, really, the interpretation of any author's writing itself? Can you see how dangerous this mindset is? So what we're doing is that we're looking at these different ways of looking at Scripture, and we're being eclectic. We're saying, okay, this is a good way of looking at Scripture. We need to have what they call epistemological humility. Aware that, hey, sometimes I tend to overemphasize certain aspects of the Bible or this topic or whatever it may be, and to always be prayerful because obviously we believe that the Bible was fully inspired. It's a spiritual book. Yet tools need to be employed to properly read it. And that's kind of the human aspect of studying Scripture. And so one thing to realize is that, all this stuff that I'm sharing with you is it's nothing that the Bible cannot tell us already. It's simply under the heading of the nature of man. The reason why we read these things is because of our own natures and our distorted views and because of our depraved, well, for those that are not converted yet,